Welcome, everyone. Today we'll be taking a deep dive into the life and music of Béla Bartók. He's considered one of Hungary's greatest composers, right alongside Franz Liszt. And what I find so fascinating about Bartók is this incredible duality. He was this foundational figure in the world of classical music, yet at the same time, a true pioneer in the field of ethnomusicology.
It's a crucial aspect to consider. We often tend to think of composers through their scores, their written music, but Bartók's deep engagement with the living music of everyday people, those folk traditions, had a profound impact on his artistic output and his whole intellectual journey.
And for this deep dive, we've gathered some really rich material to help us sort of get to the core of his significance, to explore not just the music he wrote down, but the personal experiences and the profound discoveries that really shaped his work. So where do we even begin with this remarkable journey? I understand there was this very specific moment, almost like a chance encounter, that ignited this lifelong passion he had for folk music.
Yes, absolutely. The sources highlight this pivotal experience in 1904. Bartók, he was already a trained musician at this point, but he overheard a young nanny, her name was Dosa, and she was singing folk songs in Transylvania. The seemingly simple event, just hearing these traditional melodies sung so naturally, it really sparked what became a lifelong dedication to collecting and studying folk music. And it's quite striking to think how a single encounter like this can change the course of an artist's entire career.
It truly is. And it wasn't just a passing interest, was it? This experience, it seems like, it really challenged his existing understanding of what Hungarian music actually was.
You're exactly right. At that time, the prevailing belief was that Hungarian folk music was basically gypsy music, a distinct and recognizable genre. But Bartók's encounter with Lady Dosa's singing, it opened his ears to something much older, something with deeper roots in that Magyar tradition. And this led to his collaboration with Zoltán Kodály, a partnership that proved to be hugely influential.
And together, their joint efforts, they led to a really significant discovery, didn't they? Something about the fundamental structure of these older melodies that had been overlooked before.
The fascinating thing here is that Bartók and Kodály, they discovered that these old Magyar folk melodies, they were primarily based on pentatonic scales. Now, these are musical scales that contain only 5 notes, a very ancient structure that you actually find in various folk musics all over the world. And this wasn't just a minor technical detail. This suggested a shared ancient heritage, potentially rewriting our understanding of Hungarian music's origins and linking it to broader musical traditions across Eurasia. It was a groundbreaking insight.
It's an amazing connection to uncover, and it really speaks to this deep scholarly curiosity that Bartók had. His approach to this wasn't just, sitting back and listening passively. It was a very systematic, rigorous approach, wasn't it?
Absolutely. He became one of the key figures, you could say a founding father of comparative musicology, which we now know as ethnomusicology. It's essentially studying music within its cultural context, going beyond just the notes on the page to understand the people, the traditions, how this music functions in their society. A much more holistic approach than simply analyzing scores in isolation. And the sources really emphasize how much he appreciated the phonograph. He recognized it as an essential tool for capturing folk music accurately, objectively, in its natural setting. And this allowed him to listen repeatedly, to analyze in depth.
So he was out in the field actually recording and documenting these living traditions, and his interests, they went far beyond the borders of just Hungary, as I understand it.
His efforts were really extensive. I mean, initially he was focused on Hungarian music, but his intellectual curiosity, it just expanded rapidly. He meticulously collected folk music, not only from different regions within Hungary, but also from Slovak, Romanian, Bulgarian, Moldavian, Wallachian communities. He even ventured further into traditions as geographically distant as Algeria and Turkey. This shows a truly profound intellectual curiosity, a genuine desire to understand this vast spectrum of human musical expression.
And from this deep immersion in these folk traditions, you start to see how these elements, they actually found their way into his own compositions. It wasn't simply about preservation, it was about this artistic integration, right?
Exactly. Bartók's compositional style, it's really a synthesis. He masterfully blended elements of this folk music he'd studied so deeply with the structures of classicism and the innovations of modernism. It wasn't just about quoting folk tunes directly, though. He absorbed their essence, their rhythmic vitality, their melodic contours, and integrated them into his own unique musical language.
And there were specific instances where he did directly incorporate these melodies, weren't there?
The sources mention his 2 volumes entitled For Children for Solo Piano. These actually contain 80 folk tunes that Bartók specifically selected and then wrote original accompaniments for. So this gives you a very clear, accessible example of his direct engagement with this rich heritage.
But the influence went beyond just these direct incorporations. It really shaped his whole musical sensibility.
What's so insightful is how folk music informed his melodic and harmonic sense. He developed a keen ear for these unique characteristics he encountered, like the asymmetrical dance rhythms and the sometimes very pungent harmonies you find in Bulgarian music. And these elements, they subtly and sometimes quite overtly found their way into his more abstract instrumental works, really enriching their texture and their character.
We should also consider the other composers who influenced his development. The sources point to a few key figures who played a role in shaping his style.
Early on, composers like Richard Strauss and especially Claude Debussy, they had a noticeable impact on his writing. For instance, you can hear Debussy's influence, those atmospheric and shimmering textures in Bartók's String Quartet No. 1. And later, as musical styles kept evolving in the early 20th century, he became very aware of and responsive to the innovations of composers like Stravinsky and Schoenberg. His ballet, The Wooden Prince and The Miraculous Mandarin, they clearly show his engagement with those more dissonant and rhythmically complex contemporary sounds. His style wasn't static. It was in constant dialogue with the musical landscape of his time, absorbing and transforming these various influences.
So alongside this incredibly focused musical and intellectual life, there was also a personal journey that was marked by its own complexities and evolving beliefs.
Absolutely. The sources, they mention aspects of his personal life, like his 2 marriages, raising his children. But what's perhaps more revealing of his inner world are the shifts in his personal beliefs. He transitioned from Catholicism to atheism and then ultimately embraced Unitarianism, even making a public conversion in 1916. And this suggests a continuous process of questioning and redefining his spiritual and philosophical understanding.
And even though he wasn't affiliated with a traditional religion in his later years, it seems he maintained this deep reverence for something fundamental.
The material emphasizes this. He was a devoted nature lover. He consistently spoke and wrote about what he called the miraculous order of nature with deep respect. This appreciation for the natural world perhaps gave him a different form of spiritual grounding, a sense of awe and wonder at the inherent beauty and complexity of the world around him.
And this connection to these fundamental elements, both in human culture and the natural world, it seems to have extended to his political convictions as well. He held some very strong beliefs, didn't he?
Very much so. Bartók was a staunch anti-fascist. He strongly opposed the Nazi regime and Hungary's alliance with Germany in the lead up to and throughout World War II. And this wasn't just a private disapproval. He actively refused to perform in Germany and even broke away from his publisher there. These were significant personal and professional sacrifices that really demonstrate the depth of his commitment to his principles.
And his convictions went even further, even finding expression in a specific request that he put in his will.
This really underscores his moral stance. He specifically requested that no square or street in Budapest be named after him, as long as figures like Mussolini and Hitler were still being publicly recognized there. It's an extraordinary statement, a refusal to be associated, even posthumously, with ideologies that he found abhorrent.
And ultimately, these beliefs played a major role in a very difficult decision that he had to make.
The increasingly dangerous political situation in Europe eventually forced him to emigrate to the United States with his wife, Dita Pastor Bartók, in October 1940. It was a decision born out of necessity, his inability to reconcile his values with the direction his homeland was taking.
And arriving in the United States, one might assume that a composer of his stature, coming from Europe, would be met with recognition, opportunities. But it sounds like his experience in America was actually quite different. He faced a number of challenges, didn't he?
It was definitely a period of adjustment for him. The sources suggest that he never quite felt at home in the U.S. and initially found it difficult to compose in these in these new surroundings. And what's surprising is that despite his reputation in Europe, he wasn't widely known as a composer in America during those final years. There was very little American interest in his music at that time.
That's such a contrast to his standing in Europe.
Yeah.
So how did he manage financially? And how did he continue to create during this period of relative obscurity?
Well, he relied partly on a research fellowship from Columbia University, which allowed him to continue his work on folk music. He also earned some income from performances and teaching, but the material really emphasizes that his finances were always a bit precarious, and he was a proud man. He didn't easily accept charity. But despite all of these challenges, including being diagnosed with leukemia in 1944 and his health declining, he entered this remarkable period of late creativity. It's really quite extraordinary.
And this final burst of creative energy, it resulted in some of his most enduring and widely admired works, didn't it?
It did. It was during these final years in America that he composed the Concerto for Orchestra, which has actually become arguably his most popular work. He also completed the Sonata for solo violin and started working on the Piano Concerto No. 3 and the Viola Concerto, although sadly those remained unfinished when he passed away. But it's a testament to his dedication, his creative spirit remaining so vital even in the face of serious illness.
Sadly, his life did come to an end in New York City in 1945. And it sounds like his passing was a rather understated event at the time, certainly not reflective of his later recognition.
His funeral was a modest affair. Only 10 people were there. And this really underscores the lack of widespread recognition he received in America during his lifetime. But as you mentioned, the story doesn't end there.
No, thankfully, there was later recognition from his homeland. It was a return in spirit and in body.
In 1988, his remains were repatriated to Budapest, and he was honored with a state funeral, finally laid to rest next to his wife, Dita. And this posthumous recognition really signifies the deep respect and admiration he held in Hungary. His unfinished Piano Concerto No. 3 and Viola Concerto, they were completed by his pupil, Tibor Surly, ensuring that these final musical thoughts could be heard and appreciated by future generations.
Bartók's journey is really a moving one. He was a man deeply rooted in the traditions of his culture, but also with this incredible drive to explore new musical territories in a rapidly changing world. He faced personal and professional hardships, navigating this turbulent political landscape with real integrity and conviction.
And what remains so compelling is how his deep respect for the authenticity of human musical expression and this reverence he had for the beauty and order of nature, how these things shaped his artistic vision and his personal beliefs.
It leaves us with a question to ponder. How might Bartók's appreciation for the genuine voice of cultural tradition and the harmony of the natural world, how might those things inform our own creative endeavors and how we approach the challenges of our own time? He was a fascinating figure with a legacy that continues to resonate deeply.